get started. We're going to record this for anyone who might have missed it today. I would like to welcome all of you to the 9th in a series of Zoom lectures. I think by now you probably have this first paragraph memorized, but just in case, we have added an M to the typical topics of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and that includes medicine and psychology. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Rabbi Ari Zucker, whose topic is mathematically related due to its connection to the Jewish calendar. His topic is Umattar and why you should invest in Artscroll, which I'm curious to hear about. Since Rabbi Zucker has already given one presentation in this lecture series, I'm going to abbreviate the introduction a little bit so we can get him started. Rabbi Zucker grew up in New Jersey. He studied in Israel, in Jerusalem at Yeshivat Netiv Aryeh, attended Yeshiva University, earned his degree in psychology, smicha at YU, master's in education at YU. He is currently a member of the Yeshiva University Kollel right here in Chicago. He has worked for NCSY, Yachad, and Birthright, and he and his wife live right here in West Rogers Park. And I just want to mention one other thing, a very special thanks to Ari for presenting today. You may have known that he was on the schedule for next week, but the speaker for this week unfortunately became ill. And with only 2 days of notice, Ari agreed to give his presentation early. So we are very appreciative of that. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask Rabbi Zucker your question. And now I will turn the program over to you, Rabbi Zucker.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Karish. And I hope that I'm assuming everyone whose cameras are off, it's because you're waiting in line because you want to vote today. Because first and foremost, this isn't formally a halacha shir, but we want to encourage everyone that today's a very big day and we want to vote. And actually, some of our discussion will have to deal with connecting to secular culture and secular standards. And so we highly encourage everyone to vote. Thank you so much, Dr. Karish, for making this happen. Before we begin, I'd like to dedicate, I don't know if I'm allowed to because it's not formally my shir, but I'd like to dedicate this in memory of a special yard site of the former Rebbetzin of my community in Livingston growing up, Shani Fierstein, Shani Gittel. She was an incredible woman, and her yard site is today. And my grandfather, Zichron Livracha. My grandfather's yard site was yesterday, but I think it'll count all the same. And actually, that dedication to my grandfather, Yosef Ben Yaakov HaKohen, leads us into our topic for today. Because last year we were sitting Shiva, we had the funeral, and I flew to New Jersey. My brother drove from New York, and my sister flew in from LA. My other brother came in from Boston. But the biggest schlep was on behalf of my sister and her husband. They're living in the Gush, and so they had to fly in all the way from Israel. And that became relevant because we're in the house, and various other brothers and brothers-in-law are leading davening. And my brother-in-law, he gets up, he's leading davening, and he gets to the bracha of our Baruch Aleinu, and he says the same Umattar Livracha, even though it was well before December 4th. Why? Because if we're in Israel right now, we would be in fact be saying the same Umattar Livracha. We would not be saying the same bracha in that blessing, because if anyone who's got an Israeli siddur or anyone who's learned this Mishnah and Tainus that we're going to see in a moment knows that in Israel, for whatever reason, they start saying the same Umattar Livracha. They start davening for rain on the 7th of Cheshvan, and we in Chutz La'aretz start saying it on December 4th, December 5th. And so we're going to try and understand why the discrepancy between Eretz Yisrael and the United States and the diaspora, although that, quite honestly, is pretty simple. And more importantly, similar to a question I got when the title of this year went out, why is this like the only halakha that's dependent upon the secular calendar and not the Jewish calendar? So that's what we're going to explore today. I'm not going to share my screen every single time we look at a source, just it's a lot, and it's much easier for me to be able to see you and interact with all of your beautiful faces. But so I'm going to drop it in once more, and once in a while when we need to really focus on the source, I'll bring it in. But the source is in the chat. You're more than welcome to see it. I'll translate everything that we read whether you want to listen inside or not. So we'll be okay. And before we really jump in, I just want to thank Rabbi Dr. David Shabtai from Boca Raton, because I initially heard this year from him, and then he shared a resource of some of the insights he gained were actually from Rabbi Dr. Moshe Sokolow, who was my professor in Israeli, who he discussed this topic. And so a lot of these ideas, most of them, are inspired by one of those two teachers of mine. Now, I think we can jump in and try and understand what in the world is going on with this change in our davening from V'tein bracha to V'tein Umattar livracha. And it all starts on the top of our first page, and a Mishnah in Masechet Tani. It's a very simple Mishnah. In general, the Mishnah and the Gemara in Masechet Tani talk about rain. The whole first half of the Gemara is really worried about making sure that we have rain. What happens when we aren't getting rain? And when we talk about Ta'anit, there is reference to the various fast days that we still observe to this day. But really the focus of the fast is what happens if we don't have rain. Usually we'll end up fasting. And so the Mishnah says, okay, well, if we're worried about rain, then when should we start davening for rain? We know that during the summertime, we don't want rain. We're not davening for rain. We don't get rain. But in the wintertime, as we're fast approaching, it's a little too fast as far as some of us might be concerned. In the wintertime, we want rain. We want geshamim. And so the Mishnah in Tanit on Yud Amud Aleph tells us, on the third day of Cheshvan, we start requesting rain. Rama Gamliel tells us, no, it's not on the third. It's going to be on the seventh. What's the difference between the third and the seventh? Seemingly, it's just a few days. Rama Gamliel says there's a lesson in Midos that, if you think about it, this is a little while after Sukkot. Now, let's just differentiate for a moment the difference between Mashiv Haruach and V'tein Umattar livracha. Mashiv Haruach, which is what we include in the second blessing of the Shemona Esrei, the second blessing, which is not a time where we make requests. We don't ask for things in the first three brachos. We only start asking for things later on, once we get into Atachonin, including Baruch Aleinu. So Mashiv Haruach is actually not a request for rain. We start pointing out Mashiv Haruach come Sukkot, but that's just recognizing that God, you bring rain, and we sort of develop that, and we inoculate into our minds that God's the one who brings rain, but we only start asking for rain later on. When are we asking for rain later on? According to this Machlokas, the Tanna Kama tells us on the third day of Mar Cheshvan, which is going to be about, let's say, 2.5 weeks. No, sorry. Third day of Mar Cheshvan, which is going to be about a little over a week from the end of Sukkot. And then the second opinion from Rabbi Gamliel, whom we paskin, is that it will be on the 7th of Cheshvan. Why? Because Bo Tesvav Yom Akar Akag Kadesh Yagia Akaron Sheb Yisrael and Nahar Prat. Because if you think about it, Am Yisrael, they all gathered into Israel. They all gathered into the Beis HaMikdash for the holiday of Sukkot, one of the Shalosh Regalim. And now Jews are traveling home. So maybe I live in Tel Aviv. It doesn't take me so long to get from Yerushalayim to Tel Aviv. But if someone lives at Nahar Prat, if someone lives near Babylonia, someone lives, Iraq, it could take a long time to travel. It could take up to 2 weeks. So Rabban Gamliel says we're going to wait to start davening for rain, to start saying V'tein Umattar livracha until 2 weeks after Pesach, after Sukkot, and that way our brothers and sisters can get home just fine. All right, that's very simple, very, very easy. That's when we start saying it. But Gemara jumps in and says, okay, hold on, let's understand this. The halakha is going to be like Rabban Gamliel, Amar Rabbi Elazar, halakha Rabban Gamliel. Tanya Hananya Omer, Hananya jumps in and he explains to us, Uvagola, that's just talking about people who are in Israel and I guess in the surrounding areas. But what about if you're in Gullus? What if you're in the diaspora? You're not fortunate to live in Israel or in the nearby areas. Ad Shishim Yom B'Tkufa. You wait till 60 days after the Tkufa, and we'll understand what the Tkufa is in just a moment. But it's a different time frame. We're not going to do the same thing as they do in Israel. Amar Rav Huna Bar Chiya, Amar Shmuel, Halacha Kechananya. And we pass in this way based on Shmuel and inspired by Shmuel. Shmuel tells us definitively that we're going to wait till 60 days after the Tkufa. Yeah. Tangentially and interestingly, Rashi points out that why is there a difference between Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael? We might just to get an appreciation. He says, "Bagola ain't sholin ad shishim tkufa." In the diaspora, we're going to wait 60 days after the tkufa to start asking for rain. Why? Because in Chutz La'aretz it's a different place. Eretz Israel needs a lot of rain, but in other parts of the world, we don't necessarily need quite as much rain as Israel does. Okay, that's Rashi explaining why there's a difference between Israel and Chutz La'aretz. But now we're going to really try to understand what's going on here. What's the difference, and what is this tkufa in the first place? A tkufa is a fancy way of saying either an equinox or a solstice. And as we know, the Earth travels around the sun same amount every single year, and whenever the Earth is an equal distance from the sun, and we're going to have days that are perfectly equal. And so whenever you're at an equinox or a solstice, the time of sunrise and the time of sunset will always be the same. And maybe the day will be longer. I'm gonna have to make sure I get this right. At the solstice, we'll have the longest day and the shortest day, and that doesn't necessarily impact the way that the Vasikin is going to be set up, because the day might technically start later, but it will still be longer. And so the solstice will be the longest day and the shortest day of the year, depending on how far the Earth is from the sun. But on the equinox, the fall equinox and the spring equinox, the Earth is effectively equidistant from the sun, and we're going to have the same amount of daylight both of those times. So depending on where you are in the world, it might make a difference about what those exact times are. But if the sun rose at 6:23 in the morning, it's going to set at 6:23 in the afternoon. If it rose at 7, it's going to set at 7. So it doesn't matter where you are. The sun could rise at 8 and set at 8, but you're always going to have an equal day. Allegedly, I've never seen this to be true. I've never really tried it though. You could put an egg at the exact moment where the Earth is perfectly aligned, and the egg will stand on its own, even though seemingly it shouldn't, because we're at the equinox. The Earth is perfectly equal at that point. I don't know, maybe our chemists or biologists or some of our experts can let us know about the egg. But this idea that we have 4 points of really in our journey around the sun, and these 4 points are significant. Each of these 4 points are called a tkufa, and the one that matters to us the most is the one that happens in the time period of Tishrei, the one that happens in the fall equinox. Now we're going to start sharing our screen. Am I sharing the wrong screen? Yes, I am sharing the wrong screen. All right, let's undo that, and we'll share the right screen this time. Sharing our source sheet. This is at the bottom of page 1. How do these various solstices and equinox work? We are concerned about the equinox in the fall. That would be C over here. And how does that work out? That's standard across the board. Doesn't make any difference about where you are in the world. We're always going to have the same one every single year. That on September 23rd, we're going to have the fall equinox. That's going to start the process of the night getting longer than the day, and it's always going to end on December 22nd. I think this sufficiently clear for our chevra. We've got an intelligent group here, and so we'll leave it at that. But what we gain from this is that we know that the fall equinox is always going to be on September 23rd, and if the fall equinox is always going to be on September 23rd, then all we need to do in order to figure out when we're going to start saying V'sein Talar Matzah Livracha is to add 60 days. Like Shmuel told us, all we need to do is add 60 days to the fall equinox, right? Good. So let's just take this, September 23rd. I'm so impressed with myself, I'm able to write on this. Just going to add 60 days plus 60. What does that bring us to? We're going to have 7 days in September, which brings us, and then we're going to have 31 days in October. So that brings us, 7 days in September, 31 days in October, and we ultimately should arrive at what day for us to start saying V'sein Talar Matzah Livracha? November 21st, exactly. That's why we start saying V'sein Talar Matzah on November 21st. I'm getting funny looks because we don't start saying V'sein Talar Matzah Livracha on September 21st, on November 21st. We start saying a different day. Seemingly we could or we should, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So the real question we need to understand here is actually not why do we say it on December 4th? Why aren't we saying it on November 21st? November 21st is the logical time for us to start saying V'sein Talar Matzah Livracha. Now we're going to stop our screen share so I can look at all your beautiful faces. And that's what we're going to understand. And so in order to appreciate this, we have to look at a Gemara in Eruvin. And for anyone doing Daf Yomi, this Gemara in Eruvin should sound familiar. We did it just about a month ago. The Gemara in Eruvin on Nun Vav Amud Aleph. in trying to figure out how the distances of the various cities, wants to try and calculate based on the way the sun moves, and it goes slightly tangential into astrology and astronomy. And for our purposes, it's very helpful because we learned an important psak from Shmuel. Shmuel tells us, Amar Shmuel in the top of source 2 in Eruvin, Amar Shmuel in Tkufas Nisan nofelet ela ba'arba revi hayom o b'tchilas hayom o b'tchilas halayla o b'chatzi hayom o b'chatzi halayla. When are we going to experience an equinox? Equinox is going to be at one of 4 points throughout the day. Either it'll be very, very late, it'll be very, very early, about midday or about midnight. Ve'en tkufas tammuz nofelas ela o ba'achas u'mekza o b'sheva u'mekza ve'en b'yom u've'en b'layla. And when it comes to the summer solstice, it's either going to be about 7.5 hours into the day, or maybe and different iterations of that. And then most importantly for us, in this last line, the ein ben tkufa l'tkufa ela tishim ve'echad yom ve'sheva sha'os u'mekza. How long are we going to have between each of these tkufos? How long does it take to get from a solstice to an equinox to a solstice to an equinox? 91 days, 7.5 hours, and 7.5 hours. And why? Because 91 days and 7.5 hours means that if we multiply that by 4, we're going to have an even year of 365 days and a quarter, 365 and a quarter days. And if I would ask you how many days are there in the year, then you'll tell me 365. But as we discussed last time we were together, there's not really 365. It takes the Earth slightly longer to get around the sun. It takes the Earth 365 and change days. And so that addition, that a quarter day is going to account for that 7.5 hours, and so ultimately get to 364 days, 30 hours, which comes out to 365 days and a quarter. And so this was all I wouldn't say realized, but this was all established by Julius Caesar in the year 45, 46 BCE. Way back. We're talking 2,000 years ago. And Julius Caesar set up the calendar so that this is always going to be the case, that we're always going to have our solstice and an equinox 91 and 7.5 hours, days apart. And this way we're always going to be even. Things are going to be all good. Everything will be kosher. Now there's one problem. The Earth doesn't actually rotate around the sun 365 and a quarter days. It actually takes 365 days and 0.24, et cetera, days to get around. Bringing it down into the conventional time frame, instead of 365 days and 6 hours, it's actually 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds. That's the full course all the way around the sun. So we're actually off by 11 minutes, or 11 minutes and 14 seconds. This calendar that was established by Julius Caesar, that we call the Julian calendar, was almost perfect, but not quite perfect. And in the moment, it didn't make much of a difference. For basically most of Julius Caesar's life, it wouldn't matter very much. But when you're off by 11 minutes and 14 seconds every single year, then at a certain point in time, you actually end up getting really messed up. If this tkufa, this time period between this equinox and the solstice, is off by 11 and a quarter minutes every single year, then that basically means that one day that you're off by an entire day every 128 years. 128 years after Julius Caesar's lifetime, all of a sudden they were a mess and their tkufa was off. If you wait 1,000 years over the course, not just 128, but 1,000, you'll have almost 8 days of a mismatch between where we are actually relative to the sun and where our calendar says we are. So the solstice and the equinox are all a mess. Now, the question you should be asking is, who cares? Why does it matter so much? It matters because you and I might not necessarily care, but I wonder, do any of us know how to calculate when Easter is going to happen? Now, maybe you say it's sacrilegious, and that would be fair, but I'm a little bit sacrilegious, I guess. Easter is a funny calculation, and what I have at the bottom of our page is quite literally just copied. It's not from Wikipedia, but it's from a similar kind of website. But this is the halakha. The Easter halakha says that Easter falls out on the first Sunday after the full moon. Based on the mathematical calculations, that falls on or after March 21st. What's the significance of March 21st. It's the spring equinox. So we're officially in spring once we come to March 21st. And now we need to get to a full moon. If the full moon's on Sunday, Easter is celebrated the following Sunday. Okay. Now, let's just think about this for a moment. What's the significance of it being a full moon? Why do they need a full moon after the equinox? Well, Easter, as we may know, is based off of when allegedly Jesus was killed. And if you've ever seen any paintings, you'll know that Jesus was killed the night after his Last Supper. We observe Jesus's Last Supper every year, twice a year in Artscroll, but we call it the Passover Seder because Jesus was eating at his Passover Seder. And so Easter is really very, very similarly based on Passover because it's all right. Once we're in March, then we know that we're in spring, we're in Chodesh HaAviv, and then they want to get to the full moon. What's the significance of the full moon? Passover is always on the full moon. Passover is 15 days after into the middle of the month. The middle of the month, as we pointed out last time, actually, is always a full moon. And so Easter is like a quasi Passover, and hopefully this little journey into how Easter works won't get me in trouble. But why does it matter for us? Because it matters for Christians because Julius Caesar set up this calendar, and the calendar is working great. But by the year 1500, in 1582, there was really an issue because Pope Gregory, who we can meet at the top of our third page, Pope Gregory is looking at the calendar and saying, we're a total mess. This is a disaster because by 1500, we're off by 11 days. The equinox is actually 11 days later than our calendar says it is because our calendar is slightly off. It was just 11 minutes, when Julian set it up, when the Julian calendar was set up, but now we're really off. And so Pope Gregory does something very fortunate or unfortunate, depending on whether or not you like your birthday. Pope Gregory said that October 2nd will be a Thursday, and that was consistent with the calendar, but the day after October 2nd was going to become not October 3rd, but it was going to become Friday, October 15th, because he was trying to save the calendar. He was trying to fix things. And so he pushed it together. Oh, sorry, not October 2nd, October 4th, Thursday, October 4th to October 15th. He pushed it forward 11 days. And in that way, he adjusted the calendar. He fixed the calendar so that the calendar would be consistent with the position of the earth around the sun, and the equinox would be appropriate. And therefore, for the purpose of Christians and the reason why the Pope got involved, it allowed Easter to fall out in the right period of time. So now we have this calendar that we follow in the world today called the Gregorian calendar. Why is it called the Gregorian calendar? Because Pope Gregory was the one who established it. And there was one other piece because Pope Gregory was in trouble. He was going to have the same issue. Yeah, he fixed it and they jumped 11 days. But how was he going to prevent in the year 2000 from another Pope doing it? What mechanism could he put in? So it took me a little while to understand the math behind here, but let's think about this for a moment. Let's figure it out. I'll share my screen so we can draw a little bit more. Also, so we can look at a picture of Pope Gregory. Seems like a nice guy. Who knows? I have no clue how he interacted with Jews. But it took a while for Pope Gregory's Gregorian calendar to take effect. But eventually in Britain and in their surrounding colonies, in 1752, they jumped in. And so for them, it actually was no longer 11 days. It ended up becoming 13 days. It ended up being a little later, a little bit longer. No, sorry, not 13, 12 days. And so in September of 1752, they went from Wednesday, September 2nd to Thursday, September 14th. So if you were British and you had a birthday in the interim, then it stinks for you. My little brother Jesse would have missed his birthday. But Gregory's got an issue because it's still not going to track perfectly. We're still missing some time. And so Gregory figures out that we need to create a system. Now, what's our system right now to keep track of the years? We know. If you ask most people, they'll tell you that the Earth travels around the sun 365 and a quarter days. And so every fourth year, we'll have a leap year. And that leap year accommodates for the slightly longer journey. And so we'll have 366 days in the calendar instead of 365 days in the calendar. We're all familiar with this. But maybe we remember this because it wasn't too long ago. But 20 years ago, our leap year got a little messed up, was a little different. Because Gregory realized that he couldn't be 365 or 366 days every 4 years, because that would actually set you too far ahead. We're not 0.25 days, we're 0.24 days. There's 11 and a quarter minutes that need to be accounted for. Now, 11 and a quarter minutes is not so much. But think about this, 11 and a quarter minutes means that every 128 years, we're going to be off by a day. But we've got a leap year. So really every 28 years, we're off by, we get fixed. Every 100 years we get fixed. And so for those 28 years, we're potentially off by a quarter of a day. Gregory set up the calendar. Maybe you remember this from 20 years ago, but there's a leap year every 4 years on the Gregorian calendar, except years divisible by 400. So in the year 1700, leap year. In the year 1800, leap year. In the year 1900, leap year. In the year 2000, not a leap year. There was no February 29th in the year 2000. Maybe you recall. If not, I'm assuring you that it didn't happen. And that was set up because if you think about it, every 400 years, if we don't add a leap year, then we're not running into an issue of the calendar being behind the regular year. Being ahead of the regular year. It's accounting for those 11 and a quarter minutes that add up over the course of 400 years. Over the course of 400 years, you'll basically have, you'll have only 3 extra days, not 4 extra days. So you only want 3 leap years in the year 1997, 98, 99, but the year 2000 will not be a leap year. Now, that was not so simple and not so easy. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, we got a lot of Talmidei Chachamim, a lot of impressive STEM scientists, and everyone's clear. It's very happy to hear. I hope I didn't lose people, and that's why they're stunned into silence of what in the world is going on. My Rebbe, Chaim Eisenstein, likes to say that we'll have a crunch. We're just going to say it very quickly. The system that Pope Gregory was setting up, the Gregorian calendar, necessitates that you need to not have a leap year every 400th year. And so the year 2000 was not a leap year in order to accommodate for that little extra time. And I think that will be sufficient. That will clarify. Now, the other question you need to ask is, okay, well, Rabbi Zucker, you may notice that my siddur, when I open it up, oh, hold on. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot like a super important source. Or I know one yell at me. Okay. We got to go back to page 2. Because on page 2, we see another Gemara that explains what's going on here. We saw it, but we didn't explain the significance of it. What Shmuel is telling us in this source, Ve'ein ben tkuva l'tkufa ela tishim ve'echad yom yeshiva sha'os u'mekza, Shmuel is basically saying we follow the Julian calendar. Shmuel says, I don't care what's going on in the rest of the world. Shmuel over here in Eruvin 56a is telling us that for our tefillos of rain, we're always going to follow the tkufos. We're always going to follow the path of the earth around the sun. And those tkufos are going to be decided based on the Julian calendar, based on the calendar that was set up. If you think about the time that he was living, it was just 400 or 500 years ago by Julius Caesar. So according to Shmuel, we're always going to be following the Julian calendar, except when Pope Gregory jumped forward 11 days, then he messed everything up because we're following the Julian calendar, and now the world is operating on the Gregorian calendar. So even though we theoretically would have been saying Talamata the Bracha on November 21st, that Pope Gregory changed things, and now we're saying on November 21st according to the Julian calendar, but not according to the Gregorian calendar. According to the Gregorian calendar, we jumped ahead. How much did we jump ahead? Well, at the time that the Gregorian calendar was set up, they had to jump forward 11 days. And at the time that the Brits took on the calendar, they were jumping ahead 12 days. And for us, in modern day, in the year 2020, we are now 13 days ahead of the Julian calendar. And so the Julian calendar, in the way that it was set up, where the definitive tkufa that Shmuel told us we're following, that the November 21st, we got to add 13 days to the calendar to know the right day that our 60 days post tkufa actually starts. And so what's November 21st plus 13 days? December 4th. There are 30 days in November, and it brings us to December 4th. So why are we saying the Saint Umattar Levracha on December 4th? Because that's actually 13, the appropriate number, Gregorian jump, Gregorian shift, if you will. That's what they call it in history. That's the appropriate shift from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. Now, there's one other thing to point out. Well, two other things to point out. Why is there a discrepancy between December 4th or December 5th? As we saw from Shmuel and Eruvin, the equinox, the tkufa, starts at different times per day. And so we can imagine, I'm going to use some of our white area here to start writing just because I might clarify some things. So we can imagine that in the year 2001, so we'll just do 01 here. In the year 2001, one second. Oh, so much easier. Okay. I hope we can all see that I'm typing. Confirm that you can see my typing. Can I get a nod, Dr. Karish? Okay, great. So in the year 2001, when did the Tekufa happen? It happened at 3 a.m. Great. In the year 2002, it was going to happen according to the way Shmuel describes it. The Tekufa is going to happen 6 hours later at 9 a.m. In the year 2003, what time does it happen? At 3 p.m. Great. So all of these are telling me that the Tekufa is happening, and therefore we're going to say the same Umattar Levracha on December 4th. Except in 2004, if we keep adding 6, when is the Tekufa starting? At 9 p.m. Now, basically, no matter where you are in the world, wherever, most places you are in the world, if the Tekufa starts at 9 p.m., it is no longer daytime. We're already in nighttime. We're after Tzeitzah Kokovim. Therefore, during leap years, we actually would need to go ahead one day because the calendar is not accommodating properly. And so we have to start saying it the next day. And so we have to do December 4th to December 5th. And if there were no leap years in the Gregorian calendar, every 4 years, we would actually have to go from December 4th to December 5th to December 6th because the Tekufa is constantly changing. Instead, Baruch Hashem, the Gregorian calendar has these leap years. And so the leap years basically fix it. The leap years add a day to the Gregorian calendar, which better accommodates the Julian calendar. And so we end up sorting out. Even though in 2004, the next day, we theoretically would be saying it the next day, we actually end up not doing so. We end up not having to worry about it because the Gregorian calendar is taking care of that shift. All right. We can clear all that off. And that explains why it's December 4th versus December 5th. Now, with all that in mind, we can better appreciate why it's so important to invest, not just in Artscroll, really any siddur company, anyone who publishes siddurim for Chutz La'aretz, it's important to invest in Artscroll. That being said, I don't know that I really should be giving any investment advice, but I will because I tend to do things I'm not authorized to do. We should be investing in Artscroll, not now. Now, you're welcome to invest in if you want to, but you really need to be investing in Artscroll about the year 2028, maybe the year 2020, sorry, not 2098, 2099. Why do you want to invest, right before the turn of the century? Because if we think about the way that the calendar is set up and the Gregorian calendar that accommodates and to ensure that we're always going to be on December 4th or December 5th, because of the leap years from the Gregorian calendar are explaining to are accommodating any potential shift that would take place. What's going to happen in the year 2100? We're going to have a leap year that we weren't accounting for, that wasn't really set up the right way. That leap year is actually going to send us one day further. We're going to have to go 1 day extra. And now, starting in the year 2100, our siddurim are not going to say December 4th, December 5th. They're actually going to say December 5th and December 6th. We're going to have to change all the siddurim. We're going to have to reprint every single one of them. The new RCA siddur that came out is not going to be so new then, and it's going to have to publish again. And so if you're planning on making investments 80 years from now, then I highly recommend investing in siddur companies because those companies are all going to have to reprint. Every one of our shuls is either going to have to put a little sticker on the siddur, or we're going to have to reprint the siddurim because come 2100, we are no longer going to be saying the same Umattar on December 4th and December 5th, but instead 5th and 6th. Now we'll just close. We'll do a little bit of recap. We'll just close with one interesting thought. We talked about about the diaspora. We talked about saying it December 4th, 5th. What if you're in the Southern Hemisphere? I mentioned my brother-in-law coming from Israel, but really my brother-in-law is originally from South Africa, and so I was curious if you're in the Southern Hemisphere and you don't really want rain. It's one thing for us to say, like Rashi pointed out, in certain parts of Chutz La'aretz, you don't want rain coming so early. You want it coming a little bit later. You want it starting in December. But if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, your seasons are totally different. They're totally off. And so why in the world, when it's really hot outside, are you davening for rain? Seemingly it should be reversed. And so the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, on page 3 tells us that he actually thinks that it's more appropriate to set it up to that in Provence, in France, that people should start praying for rain earlier. They should start praying for rain in Mar Cheshvan. Don't follow the Chutz La'aretz system, because the Chutz La'aretz system doesn't really work, and they actually need a lot of water. And the Shulchan Aruch later on in 1500s, Yosef Karo paskins that Maschilin Lishol Mata b'Chutz La'aretz Yom Shishim Akar Tkuvas Tishrei. Outside the land of Israel, we begin to ask for rain starting 60 days after the autumn equinox, at once autumn begins. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that whether you are in New Jersey, in Chicago, in England, in South Africa, in Australia, in Brazil, anywhere, you're always going to be asking for rain starting December 4th, 5th, or once you get to 2100 on 5th, 6th. So we'll just do a quick recap before we wrap up and wish everyone a good lunch. Why in the world are we misaligned with Israel? Why are we not saying the same Talamata the Veracha starting on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan? Plain and simply, Rabbi Gamliel points that the Gemara points out from Hananya and Shmuel paskins this way, that in Israel it's a different setup. They don't need rain as much. And so we start saying it at 60 days after the equinox. When is that equinox? Seemingly it should be September 23rd, which would mean that 60 days later is November 22nd. But that November 22nd is according to the Julian calendar, as Shmuel in Maseches Eruvin paskins. And November 22nd on the Julian calendar translates through the Gregorian shift to December 4th or December 5th on the Gregorian modern day calendar. And so we will be saying the same time to the Veracha a month from now on December 4th, December 5th. But the Gregorian calendar only accommodates for us a little bit, not entirely, and we're actually going to have to make another shift because we have fealty to the Julian calendar, at least in this regard. And so the Gregorian calendar will not be helping us once we get to the year 2100. Then we'll be a mess, and we'll start having to say the same Talamata the Veracha on the 5th and 6th, and then it is high time to start investing in Artscroll and B'Kavod my Chavrusa and our sheer host's son, Howard Karish, who is a massive Koren fan. You don't have to just invest in Artscroll, you're also allowed to invest in Koren. With that, I'll wrap up. I'm happy to field any questions, but thank you so much for learning with me today.
Thank you, Ari. Any questions? I have one for you. Can I authorize you to buy me 1,000 shares of Artscroll on December the 5th of 2099?
You are welcome to ask, but I do not expect that I will have a stock trader's license then, nor do I right now. And so thank God you got plenty of kids you can ask them.
Thank you so much for your very interesting presentation today. I hope everyone enjoyed it. The next STEM meeting, the next two will be given by Dr. Jonathan Green, a biochemist. They both will take place at noon on the next 2 Tuesdays. The first one will be titled The Origin of the Torah, Part 1, What is the History of the Torah? And the week after that will be The Origin of the Torah, How does Science View the Torah? Anytime that you want to know what's coming up the following Tuesday, simply go on the kids' website and it is there. And I want to do a very quick, what happened to my screen sharing here? Let's see if I can get to it quickly. Just give me one moment. Okay, hopefully you can see this. This is the schedule from now through December the 8th. And a very interesting talk is going to be given on December the 8th. Are we allowed to erase the name of Hashem from the computer screen? So I think that should prove to be very interesting. Thank you all for attending, and hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday at 12 noon. And Rabbi Zucker, thank you again very, very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Good. Thank you to all. I'm going to end the conference now. Thank you.